The airplane cabin hummed with the low drone of engines, but for Jaden Carter, the sound was drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. At 16, he'd never imagined his first flight would spiral into a nightmare. Around him, passengers screamed, their voices clashing like a discordant symphony as the plane lurched through turbulent skies. Jaden gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles whitening. He was just a kid from a small town in Georgia, flying to visit his grandmother in Chicago. His worn hoodie and scuffed sneakers marked him as an outsider among the first-class passengers, their designer suits and polished loafers a world apart. But now none of that mattered. The plane's intercom crackled, and a shaky voice announced, "We need a doctor, anyone with medical experience, please." Across the aisle, a woman cried out, her voice raw with pain. Jaden's eyes darted to Hera, pregnant woman, her face pale, clutching her swollen belly. Beside her, a man in a tailored suit, clearly her husband, looked frantic, his hands trembling as he tried to comfort her. "Lila, hold on, please," he begged, his voice breaking. The man's eyes, wide with terror, scanned the cabin for help that wasn't coming. Jaden's stomach twisted. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even supposed to be here, not really. His mom had scraped together every penny for this ticket, a rare chance to see his grandmother after years apart. But he'd spent countless hours volunteering at the local clinic back home, shadowing nurses, learning basic first aid because he dreamed of becoming a paramedic one day. He knew enough to recognize the signs. Lila was in premature labor, and every second counted. The plane jolted again, and a chorus of gasps filled the cabin. Jaden unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his legs shaky but his resolve firm. "I can help," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The millionaire whose name Jaden would later learn was Thomas Reed stared at him, disbelief etched into his features. "You," Thomas snapped, his tone sharp with desperation. "You're just a kid." Jaden's jaw tightened. He'd heard that tone before, the one that said he didn't belong, that he wasn't enough. Growing up black in a small, mostly white town, he'd faced it too many times. The sideways glances, the whispered assumptions. But this wasn't about him. It was about Lila, whose cries were growing weaker, her breaths shallow. "I've got training," Jaden said, stepping closer. "I've helped at a clinic. I know what to do." His voice was steady, but inside, he was terrified. What if he messed up? What if he couldn't save her? Thomas hesitated, his eyes flicking to Lila, then back to Jaden. The other passengers murmured, their voices a mix of skepticism and fear. "He's too young," a woman in a pearl necklace hissed. "Where's a real doctor?" Another man muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. Jaden felt the weight of their stares, each one a reminder of the world he'd grown up in, a world that judged him before he could even speak. Lila's hand shot out, grabbing Jaden's wrist. Her eyes, wide with pain, locked onto his. "Please," she whispered, "help my baby." That was all it took. Jaden knelt beside her, ignoring the murmurs, the turbulence, the fear clawing at his chest. "Okay, Lila," he said softly, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "Breathe with me, in and out. We're gonna get through this." The flight attendant, a woman named Sarah with a tight bun and a frazzled expression, rushed over with a first aid kit. "This is all we have," she said, her voice trembling. Jaden nodded, his mind racing through what he'd learned at the clinic. Premature labor at 30,000 feet was a nightmare scenario, but he couldn't let that stop him. He checked Lila's pulse too fast and noted her clammy skin. She was in distress, and the baby was coming whether they were ready or not. "Get me blankets, towels, anything clean," Jaden ordered Sarah, his tone firm. She nodded and scrambled away. Thomas hovered, his face a mask of anguish. "Can you actually do this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "She's my wife. That's my child." Jaden met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm gonna try," he said, "but I need you to trust me." Thomas's jaw clenched, but he nodded, stepping back. The plane lurched again, and a collective scream rose from the passengers. Jaden's heart pounded, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't control the turbulence or the prejudice in the cabin, but he could control this moment. He could save Lila and her baby. As Sarah returned with a pile of blankets, Jaden worked quickly, arranging them to make Lila more comfortable. He checked her contractions too close together. The baby was coming now, and there was no time to wait for a doctor who might never show up. "Lila, listen to me," Jaden said, his voice steady. "You're strong. You can do this. When the next contraction comes, you push. Okay." Lila nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. Thomas knelt beside her, holding her hand, his earlier skepticism replaced by raw desperation. "You've got this, Lila," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The next few minutes were a blur of intensity. Jaden guided Lila through each contraction, his hands steady as he monitored her condition. The passengers watched in tense silence, their earlier doubts replaced by a grudging respect. Sarah hovered nearby, handing Jaden supplies as he asked for them. The plane's turbulence seemed to fade into the background as Jaden focused on the task at hand, his training kicking in like muscle memory. When the baby's head crowned, Jaden's breath caught. This was it. "One more push, Lila," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "You're almost there." With a guttural cry, Lila pushed, and the baby slid into Jaden's hands, a tiny, slippery bundle, blue and still. The cabin went silent, the air thick with dread. Jaden's heart stopped. He'd seen this in training, but never in real life. He gently rubbed the baby's back, clearing its airway with a careful swipe of his finger. "Come on," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Breathe." For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. Thomas's face crumpled, and Lila let out a sob. Then, a faint cry pierced the silence. The baby's chest heaved, and color flooded its tiny face. Jaden exhaled, relief washing over him as he wrapped the newborn in a blanket and placed it in Lila's trembling arms. "She's perfect," Jaden said, his voice breaking. Lila sobbed, clutching her daughter, while Thomas stared at the tiny life in his wife's arms, tears streaming down his face. The cabin erupted in applause, the tension breaking like a dam. Passengers who had doubted Jaden now looked at him with awe. Sarah hugged him, tears in her eyes. "You're a hero," she whispered. But Jaden barely heard her. He was watching Thomas, who was looking at him with something new in his eyes. Gratitude. Yes, but also something deeper. Shame, maybe. Regret. "Thank you," Thomas said, his voice hoarse. I didn't think you could. You don't have to say it." Jaden cut him off, his tone gentle but firm. He'd heard enough apologies in his life to know they didn't always mean change. But this moment, the baby's cries, Lila's relieved smile felt like something more, something real. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the mood in the cabin shifted. Passengers approached Jaden, offering handshakes, words of praise. The woman in the pearl necklace, who had scoffed earlier, now avoided his gaze. Jaden didn't care. He'd done what he set out to do, and that was enough. But the story wasn't over. Hours later, in the hospital where Lila and the baby were taken for observation, Thomas found Jaden in the waiting room. The millionaire looked different now, less polished, more human. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice thick. "My wife, my daughter, they're here because of you." Jaden shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what I could." Thomas shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You didn't have to step up. Not after the way we treated you." He paused, swallowing hard. "I was wrong about you, Jaden. I judged you before I even knew you. And I'm sorry." Jaden looked at him, searching for sincerity. He saw it in Thomas's eyes, in the way his hands trembled slightly. "It's okay," Jaden said quietly. "Just do better. For her." He nodded toward the hospital room where Lila and the baby were resting. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. "I will. But I want to do something for you. Anything. Name it." Jaden hesitated. He didn't want money or fame. He'd seen enough of the world to know those things didn't fix what was broken. But there was something he'd always dreamed of, something that could make a difference. I want to go to medical school, he said finally. But my mom, we can't afford it. If you can help with that, I'd be grateful. Thomas stared at him, his eyes glistening. You want to save more lives, he said, almost to himself. After everything, that's your wish. Jaden nodded. It's all I've ever wanted. Thomas wiped his eyes, a choked laugh escaping him. You're gonna be one hell of a doctor, Jaden Carter. The hospital waiting room was a sterile blur of white walls and fluorescent lights, but for Jaden Carter, it felt like the eye of a storm. He sat on a stiff plastic chair, his hoodie still faintly stained with the chaos of the flight sweat, antiseptic, and the faint metallic tang of fear. His hands, now still, had held a newborn's life just hours ago. The weight of that moment lingered, heavy and unreal. Thomas Reed, the millionaire whose wife and daughter Jaden had saved, stood before him, his polished exterior fraying at the edges. The man's gratitude was palpable, but so was his guilt. Jaden's request for help with medical school had struck a chord, and Thomas seemed determined to make it right. I'll cover it, he said, his voice firm. Tuition, books, whatever you need. You're going to be a doctor, Jaden. I'll make sure of it. Jaden blinked, the words sinking in slowly. He'd spent years dreaming of medical school, but the cost had always been a wall too high to climb. His mom worked double shifts at the diner, and even with his part-time job at the clinic, they barely made ends meet. Now, this stranger man who doubted him hours ago was offering to change his life. Thank you, Jaden said, his voice quiet but steady. That means everything. Thomas nodded, but his expression was still troubled. I need to ask you something, he said, sitting across from Jaden. How did you stay so calm up there, with everyone judging you, me included? Jaden leaned back, his eyes drifting to the ceiling. He'd felt the stares on the plane, the weight of assumptions that followed him everywhere. You get used to it, he said after a moment. People look at me and see a black kid from nowhere. They don't expect much. But I learned a long time ago that I can't let that stop me. If I did, I'd never get anywhere. Thomas winced, his hands clasped tightly. I've been that person, he admitted. I saw you and thought I don't know what I thought, but I was wrong. And I'm not the only one. Jaden didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what to say. Apologies were rare in his world, and sincerity was even rarer. But Thomas's words felt real, like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep. Just don't let it happen again, Jaden said finally. Not to someone else. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. I won't. The conversation was interrupted by a nurse, who poked her head into the waiting room. Mr. Reed, your wife's asking for you. And for Jaden. They walked down the hall together, the sterile scent of the hospital sharp in Jaden's nose. In the room, Lila lay in bed, her face still pale but glowing with relief. The baby, swaddled in a soft pink blanket, slept soundly in her arms. Jaden, Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. Come here. He approached, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Lila reached out, squeezing his hand. You saved us, she whispered. I don't know how we can ever thank you. Jaden smiled, a little embarrassed. Just glad you're both okay. Lila's eyes glistened. We named her Hope, she said, glancing at the baby. Because that's what you gave us. Jaden's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to find words. Thomas stood beside him, one hand on Lila's shoulder, the other resting lightly on Jaden's. For a moment, the three of the man Little Hope were connected, bound by a moment that transcended the barriers of race, class, and doubt. But the world outside the hospital room wasn't so simple. News of the mid-flight miracle spread like wildfire, first through local outlets, then national ones. By the next morning, Jaden's face was plastered across TV screens and social media feeds. Teen hero saves pregnant woman on plane, the headlines blared. Some mentioned his race, others didn't, but the comments sections told a different story. For every post praising Jaden's courage, there were others questioning his qualifications, his motives, even his right to be in first class. Why was he even there? One commenter wrote. Probably looking for attention, said another. Jaden's mom, Marla, saw it all. She sat with him in their hotel room paid for by Thomas, scrolling through her phone with a frown. "Don't read that mess," she told him, her voice sharp. People always got something to say. But Jaden couldn't help it. He glanced at the screen, his stomach twisting as he saw the words, "Lucky guess. Not a real hero. Just a kid." The praise was loud, but the hate was louder. It always was. "I did what I had to do," he said, more to himself than to her. "Why's that gotta be a problem?" Marla set her phone down and looked at him, her eyes fierce. "Because you're black, baby. And some folks can't stand to see you shine. But you did shine. And you're gonna keep shining." Her words stayed with him as the days passed. Thomas kept his promise, setting up a scholarship fund for Jaden's education. He even went further, connecting Jaden with a mentor, a black doctor named Dr. Ellis, who'd faced his own battles to get where he was. "You've got something special, kid," Dr. Ellis told him over coffee one morning. "Not just skill but heart. Don't let the world take that from you." Jaden took the advice to heart, but the world didn't make it easy. At school, he was suddenly a celebrity and a target. Classmates who'd ignored him before now wanted selfies, while others whispered behind his back. Teachers treated him differently, some with newfound respect, others with subtle resentment. One day, a history teacher, Mr. Grayson, a man known for his colorblind lectures, pulled Jaden aside. "You're getting a lot of attention," he said, his tone clipped. "Don't let it go to your head." Jaden bit back a retort. He knew what Mr. Grayson meant. Don't get too big. Don't forget your place. But Jaden had no intention of staying small. He threw himself into his studies, spending late nights poring over biology textbooks and volunteering at the clinic. Every hour he put in was a step toward his dream and a defiance of the voices that tried to hold him back. Meanwhile, Thomas was grappling with his own reckoning. The incident on the plane had forced him to confront his biases, and he wasn't content to stop at an apology. He started speaking out, using his platform as a tech mogul to call for change. At a conference in Chicago, he told the story of the flight, his voice breaking as he described Jaden's courage and his own failure to see it at first. "I judged a kid based on nothing but my own assumptions," he said to a stunned audience. "And I almost lost everything because of it." The speech went viral, sparking heated debates online. Some praised Thomas for his honesty. Others called it performative. Jaden watched it all unfold, unsure how to feel. Part of him was grateful for Thomas's support, but another part wondered if it was enough. Words were easy. Change was hard. As the months passed, Jaden and Thomas stayed in touch. Thomas invited him to visit their home in New York, where Lila and Hope were thriving. Over dinner, Jaden saw a different side of the man who'd once doubted him, a father, a husband, someone trying to be better. "I'm funding a program," Thomas told him, his eyes bright. "For kids like you, smart, driven, but held back by circumstance. I want you to help me run it someday." Jaden was floored. "Me? I'm not even in college yet." "You will be," Thomas said with a grin. "And when you are, you'll be the one showing kids what's possible." The idea stuck with Jaden. He began to see his story not just as a moment, but as a movement. He started speaking at local schools, sharing his experience and encouraging kids, especially those who looked like him, to chase their dreams. Each time he spoke, he saw faces light up, kids who'd never had someone tell them they could be more than the world expected. By the time Jaden graduated high school, the scholarship fund had grown, thanks to Thomas's connections. Jaden enrolled in a pre-med program, his tuition fully covered. At his graduation, Thomas, Lila, and little Hope were in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. Marla stood beside them, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son cross the stage. As Jaden stepped into his future, he carried the weight of his past, the doubts, the hate, the moments when he'd had to prove himself twice as hard. But he also carried hope, the kind that had been born in a turbulent airplane cabin, the kind that refused to be dimmed. He'd saved a life, changed a heart, and set a course for countless others. And in doing so, he'd shown the world what courage looked like. What do you think? Can one act redefine justice? Or does true change demand more? Share your thoughts on where the line between right and wrong lies in a world quick to judge.